Hey everyone, tonight we're traveling back in time, way back. A world of bustling streets, roaring baths, and slightly questionable hygiene. We're diving into what life was really like in ancient Rome. Forget the movies with shining togas and perfect statues. The truth? You probably wouldn't survive a single day without learning some serious tricks. So before you get comfy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, only if you actually enjoy this. And drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fun to see Rome from all over the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft, ambient background hum, and let's step into the streets together. Imagine cobblestones underfoot, carts clattering, merchants shouting, and dogs weaving through the crowd. Congratulations, you've just woken up in the city of Rome. The good news? You're alive. The bad news? Life is chaotic, unpredictable, and full of tiny dangers lurking around every corner. But don't worry, we'll explore it all. The sights, sounds, smells, and stories that made Rome alive, messy, and fascinating. Morning creeps over Rome like a lazy cat stretching in the sun. The sky turns soft pink and gold, and the city slowly wakes up, one little sound at a time. Roosters crow somewhere in the distance, just enough to remind everyone the day's starting. Their calls echo off the stone streets, bouncing around narrow alleys and open squares. If you listen closely, you can hear the soft clatter of carts rolling over cobblestones, and maybe a sleepy horse complaining in the distance. It's not chaos yet, just a gentle stir. Rome is a city of layers. The rich live in domus, fancy houses with open atriums in the middle, little gardens, and mosaics that look like they belong in a museum. The walls are decorated with frescoes, sometimes gods, sometimes someone showing off. The floors are cold marble in the morning, so slaves usually go first, scrubbing and lighting lamps, and making sure breakfast doesn't burn. Meanwhile, the poor live in insulae, tall apartment blocks that are basically stacked rooms. The stairs creak, the floors smell faintly like last night's dinner, and the air is always crowded. You can hear people moving around, kids stumbling out of bed, and the occasional argument over space. Water is everywhere in Rome, thanks to the aqueducts. The sound of water spilling over stone fountains fills the streets. People bring jars, amphorae, buckets, anything they can carry, to fetch fresh water. Some splash it on their faces, others wash their hands, and a few say a quick prayer to the Lares and Penates, the little household gods that watch over their food and family. In the domus, mornings are slow and deliberate. A slave brushes their master's hair and prepares them for the day. Breakfast is light, bread, cheese, fruit, and maybe wine. In the insulae, it's a whole different story. Everyone's up at the same time, moving through narrow hallways. The smell of cooking fires mixes with the dampness of the street. Someone's child probably spilled porridge on the stairs, and someone else's dog is barking at pigeons outside. There's no time for fancy rituals here, just survival and trying not to trip over a neighbor's laundry. Even as the city wakes, the first sounds are soft. A cart rolls slowly down a street. Someone calls out a greeting. The baker carries trays of fresh bread, and you can smell it drifting through the streets. The clink of water from the fountains mixes with distant chatter. Maybe a cat darts between legs, chasing a mouse just as awake as the city. It's like a quiet symphony. In the insulae, families are tighter. Everyone's packed close, shouting across narrow hallways, helping or arguing, or just trying to get out the door without spilling leftovers. The noise is more alive here, less orderly, but it's honest. Breakfast varies too. In a domus, it's slow, bread, fruit, cheese. In insulae, it's whatever's quick, bread, porridge, leftovers. Some kids grab a bite while running to the streets to sell or deliver something for the family. Fountains aren't just for water. They're meeting spots and gossip points. Imagine the sound of water splashing, mixed with a horse whinnying and the clatter of carts. It's quiet chaos. And even in this chaos, there's order. People know their routines. The streets themselves are alive. Merchants start to unpack pottery, fabrics, and grains. The smell of fresh bread drifts from the bakery, mixing with herbs and smoke. A few dogs chase each other, while cats slip along walls. Children play simple games, their laughter soft in the morning air. Someone calls out a warning as a cart passes. Even the smallest things matter. A cat pawing at leftover bread, a dog barking at a stranger, the soft clink of keys, the faint smell of last night's firewood. These layer together into the morning. It's not grand, but it's Rome. Every alley and corner has its story. By the time the sun climbs higher, the streets fill more. Shopkeepers call out softly, trying to attract customers. Carts move faster. Citizens chat as they make their way to work. The city is fully awake now, but the first calm hour leaves a quiet magic behind. And if you think about it, surviving a day in Rome isn't just about strength. You need awareness, watching for carts, avoiding puddles, dodging a stray dog. It's a city that teaches attentiveness and patience. So take a moment to picture it. Soft pink skies, sunlight on cobblestones, fountains spilling water, animals roaming, kids running, bakers carrying bread, carts clattering by. It's busy, calm, messy, and alive. This is Rome at dawn, waking slowly and ready for another day. By now, the city is humming. The streets are full. The markets are opening. The rich have emerged from their domus. The poor navigate their insulae. But if you listen closely, you can still hear that first rooster, that first clatter of a cart, that first ripple of water in a fountain. That's the heartbeat of ancient Rome. And as the light strengthens, shadows shrink back into doorways and under carts, replaced by the steady rhythm of daily life. Doors swing open wider, voices grow clearer, and footsteps become more certain. Somewhere, a vendor calls out the day's prices, while a child laughs too loudly for the early hour. The quiet magic doesn't vanish. It just blends into the movement, hidden beneath every sound and step. If you slow down, even for a second, you can still feel it there, steady and constant, like the city itself, enduring, watchful, and always ready to begin again. In Rome, family was everything. Not in a cheesy, all-for-one kind of way, but more like a well-oiled, slightly chaotic machine. Each member had their role, and if one person slacked off, well, things could get messy fast. At the top of the family hierarchy sat the paterfamilias, the father and official head of the household. He had the final say on everything. What to eat for breakfast, who got sent to the market, whether a neighbor's complaint was worth listening to. Think of him as the manager of a small, very intense empire, with authority over everyone in the house. Wife, children, and slaves alike. In a wealthy domus, mornings were already bustling when the paterfamilias stirred awake. He might be stretched out on a marble couch, the soft morning light highlighting the frescoes around him. Slaves would bring water for washing, oil for his skin, and maybe a simple breakfast, bread dipped in honey or a small piece of cheese. While he sipped his wine-water mixture, he might give instructions for the day. Marcus, fetch the ledger. Julia, check the garden. Lucius, see that the deliveries leave on time. Every order, every gesture reinforced his authority, and everyone knew it. There was no arguing with the paterfamilias. Well, not unless you wanted to risk being scolded or sent running errands in the hot sun. The wife, or Matrona, had her own set of duties, but she was far from idle. In Adomus, she managed the household's daily life, supervising the slaves, organizing meals, tending to the children, and making sure the house looked presentable for guests. She might inspect the food, adjust the slaves' work, or make a quick decision about clothing or household repairs. Even leisure for her was structured. She might weave, read, or practice music, but it was always part of maintaining her role in the household. And while the paterfamilias held authority, a clever Matrona could influence decisions behind the scenes, whether by a raised eyebrow, a gentle suggestion, or simply knowing exactly when to speak. Children had a very different experience. Boys and girls were trained from an early age to know their place and responsibilities. Boys would eventually go into education or work, learning reading, writing, and sometimes rhetoric if their family could afford tutors. Girls were taught household skills, weaving, cooking, and managing domestic affairs, but also manners, social skills, and sometimes a bit of reading and writing. While children were expected to obey, there was a surprising amount of play too. Imagine a little boy dashing across the atrium, trying not to trip over the dog, or a girl sneaking a piece of bread before the household breakfast, giggling because the servants weren't looking. Even in a highly structured family, there was room for mischief. Slaves were the quiet backbone of the household. They woke first, often before the sun, and were tasked with preparing food, cleaning the atrium, tending gardens, and assisting every member of the family. Their work might seem invisible, but without them, the household would fall apart. They moved through the rooms like ghosts, efficient and careful, always attentive. Sometimes, they even provided the household with humor, whispering jokes or playful remarks when the paterfamilias wasn't looking, or quietly rolling their eyes at the children's antics. Life as a slave wasn't easy, but in the morning bustle, they were the invisible engine keeping everything running smoothly. Despite these rules and roles, Roman families were surprisingly flexible. A clever wife could influence decisions, a mischievous child could bend the rules, and a quick-thinking slave could keep things running smoothly with a wink or a whispered suggestion. The paterfamilias had authority, yes, but he also relied on the cooperation, skill, and insight of everyone else in the household. And so, family life in Rome was a mix of discipline, routine, care, and small moments of chaos and humor. Exactly the kind of world that made surviving a day or a lifetime in Rome both challenging and fascinating. Even the way Romans treated visitors reflected family hierarchy. Guests were greeted formally in a domus, usually in the atrium, and their placement depended on their status. Meals and hospitality were carefully managed, ensuring the paterfamilias' authority and reputation remained intact. In poorer homes, hospitality was simpler but heartfelt. A neighbor dropping in might share a meal or a bit of gossip, laughter spilling over the walls. Family, in all its forms, was the core of social life. In essence, to understand Rome, you need to understand the family. It was more than blood. It was a machine of roles, rules, humor, and tiny rebellions. Children learned where they fit. Wives exercised influence. Slaves kept the household alive. And the paterfamilias kept everyone on track. Meals, chores, play, prayer, and leisure all reflected this structure. And in this mix of order, care, and occasional chaos, life moved forward, day after day, in the streets and homes of one of history's most remarkable cities. So next time you imagine walking through a Roman household, picture it all. A father issuing orders from a marble couch, a mother managing the morning bustle, children sneaking bites or chasing each other across the atrium, and slaves moving silently, but efficiently through every room. Add the smell of bread baking, the sound of water from a fountain, the gentle clatter of dishes, and maybe a stray dog or cat causing a little trouble. That's the Roman family, a living, breathing network of people, hierarchy, humor, and daily survival. And just like in any family, you quickly learn who really runs the show and who's just along for the ride. If you think surviving ancient Rome was easy, just wait until you peek at their meals. Food was everywhere, but what counted as normal might make your stomach twist in confusion or fascination. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner were structured around family, class, and season, and each meal reflected who you were in Roman society. Let's start with the mornings. Breakfast, or ientaculum, was usually small. Most Romans weren't sitting down to a full banquet before heading to work, unless you were extremely rich and wanted to show off. For ordinary people, it was bread dipped in wine, maybe some olives or cheese if you were lucky. Imagine a kid yawning in a narrow, insular corridor, biting into a slightly stale piece of bread while dodging a neighbor's laundry hanging from the upper floors. The smells are strong, the sun barely peeking over the rooftops, and the city slowly hums to life around them. In Adomus, breakfast was a bit fancier, but still modest. Slaves would prepare soft bread, drizzle honey, or serve fruit. Maybe a bit of cheese, sometimes eggs. And of course, there was pasca, a sour wine mixed with water, which was the breakfast drink of choice for soldiers and commoners alike. The paterfamilias might sip it slowly while issuing orders for the day, because nothing says morning authority like slightly sour wine in a fancy cup. Lunch, or prandium, was also simple. It could be leftovers from the previous evening, bread with cheese, fruit, or cold meat. The emphasis wasn't on extravagance, but on sustenance. Street vendors might sell bread, sausages, or olives in the forum, and ordinary citizens often grabbed something quick as they worked or ran errands. Picture a baker's tray of warm bread, the smell drifting through a narrow street, a stray cat sniffing at the edges, and a kid darting past with a small bundle of olives clutched in his hands. That's everyday life in Rome. Smells, chaos, and all. Dinner, cena, was the real event. For the wealthy, it was long, leisurely, and carefully arranged. Picture an atrium lit by soft lamps, mosaic floors reflecting the glow. Food came in courses: vegetables, fish, meats, fruits, and sometimes exotic dishes if the family could afford it. Bread was served on the side, wine diluted with water poured from elegant cups, and conversation flowed, or occasionally, arguments erupted over who had the best seat. A clever child might sneak a bit of fruit before it's served, a dog might whine near the table, and a slave would silently keep the trays coming. Even in such refined settings, there was room for small chaos. Meals reflected social hierarchy. The paterfamilias, or oldest male, often reclined at the head of the table, showing off authority and leisure. Everyone else followed a careful order, from eldest children to trusted slaves who might be allowed a seat near the table for convenience. In smaller homes, the meal was simpler. Everyone gathered around a small table, maybe sitting on stools, sharing food quickly before returning to chores. It was less about display and more about staying fed. Food itself was fascinating. Romans ate lots of bread, grains, and legumes. Olive oil was everywhere, not just for cooking, but for flavor and dipping. Cheese, fruits, vegetables, and fish were common. Meat was eaten too, but usually by the wealthy or for special occasions. A typical plebeian might get some pork, chicken, or salted fish now and then, while a patrician could enjoy exotic delicacies like peacock, dormice, or oysters imported from faraway seas. And then there was garum, the fish sauce that basically flavored everything. Imagine the smell, a strong, salty, fishy aroma that Romans loved, but might make you wrinkle your nose today. It was used on meat, vegetables, even bread. Some people adored it, some tolerated it, and some would sneak it into recipes for guests who weren't paying attention. Street food was another world. Vendors sold bread, cheese, olives, sausages, nuts, and sometimes pastries filled with honey. If you were rich, you might not touch these. If you were ordinary, they were lifesavers on a busy day. Markets in the Forum were lively, full of haggling, smells, and chatter. A Roman could wander from stall to stall, tasting fresh olives, examining fruits, and buying bread still warm from the oven. Imagine kids darting between stalls, trying to grab a small piece of something before a parent notices. Street food was casual, noisy, and perfectly Roman. Drinking was also a key part of life. Wine was everywhere, but almost always diluted with water. Drinking pure wine was considered extreme or reserved for special celebrations. Ordinary citizens drank wine daily. Soldiers drank Pascha, and the wealthy might sip imported wines while reclining at dinner. Water from fountains was common, though not always perfectly clean. Romans were careful about what they drank, often using wine to avoid the risk of sickness from contaminated water. Even meals had rituals. Families often said a small prayer, offering thanks to the household gods. Slaves served food, sometimes with silent efficiency, sometimes with small gestures of humor if no one was watching. Conversations could range from politics, gossip, or household affairs. And through it all, the city hummed outside the walls. Children playing, carts rolling, cats prowling, fountains splashing. Snacks and smaller bites were common too. Fruit, nuts, bread, and cheese were grabbed during the day. People carried small parcels of food if they had to work in the streets or fields. Even wealthy children might sneak a bit of honey or fruit while no one was looking. Food was more than survival. It was comfort, social glue, and sometimes a subtle source of rebellion for clever kids or playful slaves. Meals also reflected the seasons. Summer brought fresh vegetables, fruits, and fish. Winter meals leaned on preserved foods, salted meats, dried fruits, and legumes. Romans paid attention to freshness and flavor, though storage was tricky without modern refrigeration. They relied on cool cellars, clay jars, and preserved ingredients to survive months when fresh produce was scarce. Finally, consider the atmosphere. Imagine a domus at dinner, soft lamplight reflecting off mosaics, the smell of roasting meat and fresh bread, wine gently poured into cups, servants moving quietly but attentively, and a family laughing or arguing softly over small matters. Or picture a poor family in an insula, crowded around a simple wooden table, bread and cheese for dinner, kids fidgeting, a dog underfoot, and the distant sounds of the city outside. Every meal is a story, a reflection of social status, family, and survival. Eating in Rome wasn't just about staying alive. It was about order, family, and tradition. Food was nourishment for the body and the household, a way to honor the gods, a chance to teach children manners, and a reason to gather. Sometimes it was quiet, sometimes chaotic, and sometimes hilariously messy. But whether you were reclining in a marble atrium or crowded in a tiny apartment, meals tied everyone together, reminding them of their place in the household and the city. And that's the thing about Roman food. It's familiar and strange at the same time. Bread, cheese, wine, fruit, easy to recognize. Garum, exotic meats, Pascha, curious and maybe a little intimidating. Add the sounds of the city outside, the chatter of family members, the careful efficiency of slaves, and the occasional chaos of kids and animals, and you get a full picture of daily life. Eating in Rome was a performance, a ritual, a survival skill, and a bit of entertainment all at once. So next time you imagine sitting down for a meal in ancient Rome, picture this. Soft sunlight streaming into the atrium, the smell of bread and roasting vegetables, slaves moving quietly, children sneaking bits, the paterfamilias reclining with authority, and the city alive outside. Every bite, every sip, every gesture tells a story of survival, social order, and the small joys that made life in Rome so fascinating and maybe a little hard to survive. If you think surviving ancient Rome was just about food, water, and avoiding car accidents, think again. Clothing was a whole other world. And not just because it could get complicated. What you wore told everyone exactly who you were, how rich you were, and maybe even what mood you were in that day. Let's start with the basics. Most Romans wore tunics, simple, knee-length pieces of cloth, usually made of wool or linen. Men wore them, women wore them, sometimes longer, and children wore smaller versions. Simple, practical, easy to move in. But the tunic wasn't just about covering yourself. The cut, the fabric, the color, it all spoke volumes. Poorer citizens had rougher, shorter tunics in muted colors, while the rich could have bright, soft linen or dyed wool that cost a small fortune. Imagine a child tugging at the hem of a rough wool tunic, wishing it was soft like the senator's son next door. On top of tunics, men sometimes wore a toga, a large semicircular cloth draped over the body like an elaborate, slightly confusing blanket. Togas were formal, worn for public appearances, political meetings, and special occasions. They were tricky to put on. One wrong fold, and you look foolish. Picture a young Roman man trying to drape it over his shoulders, slipping, tripping on the corner, and a servant quietly correcting him with a shake of the head. That's Roman fashion. Serious, but occasionally hilarious. Women wore stolas, long dresses worn over a tunic, often cinched at the waist with a belt. These could be brightly colored, patterned, or simple, depending on status. Married women wore them to show their position, while unmarried girls might wear simpler tunics. Accessories mattered too. Jewelry, brooches, and hairpins told stories of wealth, taste, and social connections. You could spot a wealthy Matrona a block away by her fine stola and sparkling jewelry, while her neighbors might chuckle at her struggling to avoid spilling wine on her gown during dinner. Slaves, on the other hand, dressed for practicality. Their tunics were plain, durable, and easy to work in. No bright colors, no fuss, no long flowing gowns to trip over while carrying water. They blended into the background, moving through the household or streets efficiently, quietly, and without drawing attention, unless a mischievous child accidentally tugged at a corner of a servant's tunic while chasing a cat. Footwear also mattered. Sandals were the go-to for most people. Simple leather straps for the streets. More elaborate designs for the wealthy. Shoes could indicate status, profession, or even political allegiance. Soldiers had sturdy, reinforced boots for marching, while citizens strolling through the forum might wear softer, decorative sandals. Kids often went barefoot, running around the streets and alleyways, squealing at the smell of the bakery or chasing a stray dog. Colors were a big deal too. White was associated with purity and political office, purple with wealth and high status, since purple dye was expensive, and dull browns or grays for everyday wear. If you wore the wrong color at the wrong event, people noticed. Imagine someone proudly wearing a bright purple toga to a simple family meal in the Insulae. Neighbors might whisper, "Someone's trying too hard today." Hairstyles were part of the fashion statement. Men shaved or styled their hair, depending on the era. Beards came in and out of fashion. Women spent hours braiding, curling, and arranging their hair, sometimes using oils, perfumes, or ribbons. A young girl practicing braids might tangle herself in her own hair or sneak a pin to tease her little brother. Rome was never short on drama. Even slaves and workers, though less fancy, kept hair tidy for practicality. Special occasions meant extra effort. Festivals, religious ceremonies, or political events required full dress, bright colors, jewelry, decorated sandals, and perfectly arranged hair. The paterfamilias might don a toga praetexta, a toga with a purple border, while children were dressed in their best tunics, and the matrona adorned herself with jewelry and a carefully arranged stola. The household was bustling, slaves moving quickly, children running or hiding, dogs weaving between legs, and the street outside already starting to fill with neighbors and vendors. Even fashion mistakes could be entertaining. Imagine someone trying to wear a toga too long for their height, tripping on the hem, or a child tugging at the mother's stola in excitement. Life in Rome balanced elegance and practicality with a touch of chaos. The city noticed, remembered, and sometimes laughed quietly behind a hand fan or a curtain. In poorer homes, fashion was simpler but still meaningful. Tunics and simple belts, modest sandals, and occasionally a splash of color or jewelry, if affordable. Even here, clothing conveyed identity, family pride, and effort. A mother might carefully mend a tunic while chatting with neighbors, kids chasing each other around the small courtyard, a dog barking, the smells of bread from a nearby oven drifting in, all part of the everyday tapestry of life. Clothing wasn't just about appearances. It affected movement, comfort, and survival. Togas could restrict mobility. Long stolas could get caught on steps. Sandals offered little protection from the rough streets. Romans learned to navigate their outfits as carefully as they navigated city life. Slaves, children, and workers had the easiest time. Simple clothing let them move quickly, carry loads, and survive the day. Accessories like belts, brooches, and jewelry weren't just decoration. They were statements. A clever matrona could signal wealth or connections with a brooch, a ring, or a simple necklace. A young man might wear a colored cord to show his political loyalty, while a wealthy child might flaunt new sandals to impress neighbors. And all the while, the city watched, noted, and sometimes whispered. Fashion in Rome was about identity, survival, and subtle communication, all wrapped up in fabric, leather, and careful hair arrangements. So, when you picture a Roman street, imagine it full of color, movement, and sound. Tunics flapping in the breeze, togas slipping off shoulders, sandals clattering over cobblestones, children chasing dogs, mothers adjusting stolas, and servants weaving through the chaos. Fashion wasn't just clothing. It was a way to live, work, and survive in a city that demanded attention, awareness, and a little humor. In Rome, you dress for survival, status, and a splash of style. Get it right, and you blended into the rhythms of the city. Get it wrong, and you became a moving joke, or worse, a hazard on the streets. Either way, clothing mattered. Always. If ancient Rome had a heart, it was the Forum. Picture it as the city's living room, market, courtroom, and gossip hub all rolled into one big, dusty square. It was where life unfolded in full view. And if you weren't careful, you'd get tripped over by a cart or a senator. Morning in the Forum began slowly, with vendors setting up stalls, arranging fresh bread, olives, fruit, and sometimes salted fish. The smells drifted through the streets, mixing with the sound of water from nearby, fountains, and the soft chatter of early pedestrians. A child might dart past the stall, snatching a piece of fruit before a parent notices, while a dog wove lazily between legs. Everything was alive, but nothing too loud yet. A gentle city heartbeat. The Forum wasn't just a market. It was the center of public life. Political speeches echoed across the square, and anyone with an opinion or enough courage could speak up. Senators in bright togas, carefully folded and draped, strutted through, discussing laws, taxes, or the latest gossip from the palace. Ordinary citizens, dressed in simpler tunics and sandals, wandered among them, watching, listening, or occasionally heckling with a witty remark. Picture a young boy hiding behind a column, giggling as a senator fumbled his speech, or a merchant gesturing wildly at a crowd to sell his wares. Life here was part theater, part survival. Social hierarchy was impossible to ignore. Patricians and wealthy citizens lounged in the shade, talking business or politics, while commoners jostled for space near the market stalls. Slaves moved quietly, carrying parcels or water, always alert, always ready to help, or occasionally roll their eyes at a clumsy master. Even dogs seemed aware of rank, wagging tails at children, but keeping a respectful distance from important figures. Religion was everywhere. Temples and shrines dotted the Forum, and citizens often stopped to throw a coin, whisper a prayer, or bow their heads to the household gods or state deities. Festivals were especially lively. Imagine priests in elaborate robes, music playing, dancers weaving through the crowd, children running with excitement, and the smell of incense drifting over the square. Even the busiest citizens paused to watch, laugh, or join in. Markets were bustling. Vendors shouted prices, displaying bread, fruits, olives, cheese, and small trinkets. Merchants selling cloth or jewelry competed for attention, while customers haggled loudly, sometimes dramatically, making a show of their bargaining skills. Children darted through the crowd, occasionally bumping into a cart or tripping over a dog, while adults tried to keep the chaos under control. It was energetic, noisy, and full of life, but also perfectly organized in its own Roman way. Entertainment also happened in public spaces. Sometimes performers, jugglers, musicians, and storytellers drew crowds. Imagine a flute playing softly as a juggler tosses knives into the air, a small dog chasing after coins tossed by amused spectators, and a child pointing excitedly while a parent tries to calm them. Public life was as much about observing, learning, and connecting as it was about surviving the busy streets. Daily business happened too. Contracts were made, debts discussed, and goods exchanged. Some citizens came to make deals, others to hear news or gossip, and some just to enjoy the spectacle. The Forum was alive with the smells, sounds, and motions of a city at work. Imagine bread baking nearby, the clatter of carts over cobblestones, water splashing from fountains, and a priest chant mixing with the hum of conversation. It was sensory overload in the most organized way possible. Even fashion mattered here. Wealthy citizens flaunted togas, bright colors, jewelry, and hairstyles designed to impress. Ordinary Romans, slaves, and children moved in simpler clothing, blending into the bustling crowd. Every gesture, every robe fold, every coin exchange broadcasted status, intent, or opinion. You could read a person's social role just by watching how they walked, where they stopped, and who greeted them. The Forum wasn't static. It changed with the seasons, festivals, and political events. During religious celebrations, the square filled with music, sacrifices, and dancing. During elections, citizens lined up to hear speeches, cheer, or boo. During market days, the smells and sounds of food, animals, and traders dominated. And throughout it all, children played, dogs ran, and the city breathed. Public baths, temples, and meeting halls connected to the forum, making it a hub for daily life. Citizens could socialize, relax, conduct business, and observe politics all in one place. Even accidents were part of the experience. A tripping child, a spilled basket of fruit, a distracted horse clipping a passerby. Small moments that reminded everyone the city was alive, unpredictable, and human. In essence, the forum was Rome itself. A mix of hierarchy and chaos, work and leisure, religion and gossip, observation and participation. Walking through it meant experiencing the heartbeat of the city, noticing the little details, the smell of bread, the clatter of sandals, the subtle shuffle of a slave avoiding attention, or the laughter of a child chasing a dog across cobblestones. It was messy, beautiful, and perfectly Roman. And for anyone hoping to survive Rome, observing the forum taught you patience, awareness, and subtlety. Watch the carts, respect the hierarchy, smell the food, enjoy the spectacle, and maybe, just maybe, laugh at the small chaos that made the city alive. In ancient Rome, learning wasn't just about reading dusty scrolls. It was a full-on, sometimes chaotic, often surprisingly human part of daily life. Kids didn't just sit in classrooms staring at a chalkboard. They ran, argued, laughed, got scolded, and occasionally threw a wax tablet across the room. Education began at home. Boys and girls were first taught by their parents, learning basic reading, writing, counting, and moral lessons. Imagine a father tracing letters in the sand while his son or daughter carefully copies them. Tiny fingers smudging the shapes, dogs or cats wandering nearby, and a mother supervising from the kitchen, keeping one eye on a cooking pot and another on the lesson. Even in this simple setting, life was busy, loud, and alive. Once children were ready, wealthier families often hired private tutors or sent their children to a ludus, a small school. The teacher, or literator, taught reading, writing, and arithmetic. The classroom could be cramped, full of students sitting on benches, scribbling on wax tablets. A clever child might sneak a small drawing in the corner. A friend might whisper a joke, and the teacher might sigh, rubbing tired eyes. Lessons were repetitive but essential. Learning to read, write neatly, and count accurately was survival in both the market and civic life. For boys aiming to enter politics, law, or public service, education continued with rhetoric and philosophy. Tutors or grammatici trained them in speaking, debate, and literature. Imagine a young boy standing nervously in a sunlit courtyard, reciting passages from Homer or Virgil, while classmates nodded, whispered corrections, or tried not to giggle. Practice speeches were common, and mistakes were opportunities for gentle teasing, or for a tutor to give sharp warning. It wasn't all serious. Clever jokes, playful exaggerations, and accidental flubs added humor to the lessons. Girls' education focused more on household skills, weaving, managing servants, cooking, and social etiquette. But many learned reading and writing too, especially in wealthier households. Picture a young girl practicing letters while tending small chores, a cat brushing against her legs, and her mother offering praise or a teasing comment. Knowledge wasn't just practical, it was part of daily life, blended seamlessly with household routines. Slaves often played a surprising role in education. Tutors might rely on a household slave to fetch scrolls, manage writing materials, or even assist in lessons. Some slaves were highly educated themselves, teaching language, math, or music. Imagine a quiet slave moving between desks, correcting a wax tablet, while children argue about the correct way to write a number. Their contribution was often invisible to the casual observer, but essential to learning. Lessons could be tough. Writing required wax tablets and styluses. Counting used pebbles or small tokens. And reading involved both loud recitation and memorization. Mistakes were corrected, sometimes harshly, sometimes gently, but humor and small acts of rebellion were always present. A student might hide a tablet, scribble funny doodles, or whisper to a friend. Teachers understood this was part of life and often tolerated minor antics, knowing that curiosity and mistakes were part of learning. Roman education wasn't just about literacy. Students also learned morals, civic duties, and social etiquette. Boys and girls were expected to understand their place in the household and city, know how to behave with elders, and learn small practical skills like calculating payments or reading contracts. Imagine a young boy practicing polite greetings in the courtyard, mimicking his father's gestures while the dog weaves between his legs. Every day was a mix of knowledge, observation, and life lessons. Public spaces were classrooms too. Children observed markets, baths, and the forum, absorbing language, commerce, and social rules. Watching senators argue, merchants haggle, and children play, all of it taught lessons beyond the wax tablet. Life itself was a teacher, and attentive kids learned quickly. Even leisure could be educational. Reading aloud, storytelling, and memorization games were common. Children recited poetry, sang songs, or played counting games. A tutor might use playful competitions. Who can recite the first lines of the Aeneid without mistakes? Children laughed, stumbled, and learned all at once. Education was also tied to survival. Literacy meant managing money, understanding contracts, or reading signs in the city. For wealthier children, it prepared them for politics, public speaking, and social status. For poorer children, practical skills and literacy could improve trade or household life. Knowledge was both a tool and a pathway. Even the city itself served as a lesson. Roman streets were classrooms for observation, commerce, behavior, fashion, architecture. Kids learned by watching interactions, noting hierarchy, and testing limits. Imagine a child observing a senator's toga slipping, a vendor haggling loudly, and a dog chasing a ball through the square. All lessons in social order, observation, and subtle humor. In essence, education in Rome was everywhere. At home, in the schoolroom, in the streets, and even in the kitchen. It combined formal lessons, practical skills, and social observation. Mistakes, small rebellions, laughter, and creativity were all part of the process. Children learned not just to survive, but to thrive, navigate society, and understand the world around them. So next time you picture a Roman child learning, imagine this. Wax tablets, ink, small arguments over spelling, whispered jokes, a tutor waving a hand in exasperation, the hum of city life outside, and the occasional dog or cat adding chaos. That was education in Rome. A mix of discipline, observation, fun, and survival, all rolled into one lively, sometimes messy, always fascinating experience. In ancient Rome, religion wasn't just something you did on Sundays, or whatever day counted back then. It was woven into every part of life, from waking up to bedtime, from meals to work, and even when you were running errands in the forum. The gods were everywhere, and Romans believed keeping them happy was the ultimate survival skill. Every morning, families offered small prayers or sacrifices to their household gods, called Lauras and Penates. Picture a mother lighting incense at a small shrine in the corner of the atrium, while her children place tiny offerings of bread or fruit. A paterfamilias bows, murmuring thanks, and the household dog trots past, sniffing curiously. Even the family cat might investigate the incense smoke. Romans believed animals had a kind of sixth sense about divine matters, or maybe it was just curiosity. Temples dominated the city skyline. Each neighborhood had its favorites. Jupiter's grand temple towering over the Forum, Venus tucked elegantly nearby, Mars in a quieter district. Pilgrims, citizens, and merchants all made stops at these sacred places. Some offered coins, some animals, some recited prayers aloud. Imagine a bustling square, incense smoke drifting in the warm air, priests in flowing robes performing rituals, children staring in awe, and a stray dog weaving through the crowd, dodging sandals and cartwheels. Religion was alive, loud, and sometimes messy, but never ignored. Festivals were another highlight. The Roman calendar was packed with celebrations, sometimes honoring specific gods, sometimes marking seasonal events. Each festival brought music, food, performances, and public games. Streets filled with colorful banners, citizens in bright clothing, and vendors selling sweet treats and souvenirs. Picture a young boy tugging at his mother's hand, eyes wide at a parade of dancers and musicians, while a dog chases a tossed coin. Chaos and order existed side by side, exactly the Roman way. Some festivals were for luck and protection. Farmers offered thanks to Ceres for a good harvest, sailors to Neptune for safe travel, soldiers to Mars before a battle. Romans believed neglecting a god could be disastrous, so rituals were carefully performed, often with humor, creativity, or small errors that everyone laughed about. Imagine a goat trying to escape mid-sacrifice while a priest flails, children giggling, and a crowd murmuring. The gods probably enjoyed the entertainment. Public games and spectacles often coincided with festivals. Chariot races at the Circus Maximus, gladiatorial contests in the Colosseum, and theatrical performances in open-air theaters brought excitement, awe, and sometimes horror. Citizens cheered, children screamed, and vendors shouted over the crowd selling snacks or small charms. Even the noise and chaos were part of the ritual, blending devotion, entertainment, and community. Religious education began early. Children learned stories of gods, heroes, and legendary founders. These weren't just bedtime tales. They taught morals, explained natural events, and reinforced social values. Imagine a father or tutor narrating the adventures of Aeneas or Hercules, children leaning forward with wide eyes, occasionally whispering questions, while a cat curls up nearby. These stories shaped identity, loyalty, and understanding of the world. Romans also practiced superstitions in daily life. Odd numbers, birds' behavior, or unusual events could be interpreted as omens. A crow flying overhead might signal danger. A strange dream could prompt a small offering, and even sneezing at the wrong moment required a quick "bless you" to stay safe. Picture a young girl, wide-eyed, watching a neighbor hurriedly place a coin on the threshold after a particularly loud sneeze. Superstition was part of survival. After all, family and public rituals often overlapped. Weddings, births, and funerals included prayers, sacrifices, and ceremonial acts. A family might invite neighbors, arrange small games or performances, and prepare food to honor the gods and ancestors. Imagine the smells of roasted meat and honey cakes mingling with incense, children laughing or stealing snacks, and slaves bustling quietly to keep everything in order. Religion was both communal and personal, structured and messy, sacred and practical. Even the city itself felt religious. Temples, statues, fountains, and sacred trees reminded citizens constantly of divine presence. People paused in streets, glanced at omens, or offered silent thanks while running errands. Daily life and devotion were inseparable. Picture walking through a crowded street, noticing a priest sprinkling water, a musician playing a hymn, and a child trying to pet a ceremonial bird. It was life, learning, and worship all at once. In essence, Roman religion wasn't just a belief system, it was life itself. From small household offerings to grand public festivals, it shaped behavior, culture, and survival. Humor, chaos, and creativity were part of the process. Gods were honored, stories were told, lessons were learned, and the city thrived. So, if you imagine yourself wandering Rome during a festival, see this: colorful banners flapping in the breeze, priests chanting, musicians playing, children laughing, vendors shouting, and dogs dodging carts, all under the watchful eyes of gods and statues. Religion wasn't just about piety. It was about community, survival, storytelling, and a little bit of entertainment. That's ancient Rome. Devout, chaotic, colorful, and endlessly fascinating. Surviving ancient Rome wasn't just about work, family, and dodging carts. It was also about fun. Yes, Romans worked hard, prayed harder, and followed strict social rules. But when it came to leisure, they knew how to enjoy themselves. And if you think their idea of fun was only gladiators and chariot races, think again. One of the most popular pastimes was the theater. Romans loved plays, often performed in large open-air theaters. Imagine sitting on stone benches, sunlight warming your shoulders, the smell of roasted nuts and bread wafting from vendors nearby. Actors wore elaborate masks and tunics, exaggerating gestures so even the person in the back row could follow. Comedies made everyone laugh at ridiculous situations. Tragedies tugged at hearts, and sometimes the audience heckled the performers, politely, of course, or maybe not so politely. Kids giggled at the exaggerated masks, while parents tried to shush them quietly, and dogs weaved between legs, adding extra chaos to the scene. Public baths were another central hub of leisure. These weren't just places to get clean, they were social hotspots. Men, women, and sometimes children, depending on the time and bath, gathered to relax, chat, exercise, or even conduct business. Imagine steaming rooms, warm pools, people scrubbing and gossiping, while friends debated politics or told stories. Slaves moved silently, carrying towels and oils, while someone accidentally splashed water onto a passerby, leading to laughter or mock outrage. Baths combined hygiene, health, and humor, survival, and fun all in one. For those with money, banquets were a highlight. Picture a long table loaded with olives, bread, cheese, meats, and wine, candles flickering, and music playing softly in the background. Guests reclined on couches, discussing philosophy, politics, or the latest gossip. Servants quietly refilled dishes while a child sneakily grabbed a leftover grape, and a dog curled up near the host's sandals. Banquets weren't just meals. They were displays of wealth, status, and culinary skill. Children and adults alike played board games and physical games, dice games, knucklebones, and even early versions of checkers were popular. Kids ran through streets, courtyards, and squares, chasing balls, playing tag, or racing carts. Imagine a young boy darting past a bakery, narrowly avoiding a cart, while his friend cheers him on. Romans understood that games taught skill, strategy, and a little cunning, a crucial part of surviving the bustling city. Then there were spectacles, chariot races at the Circus Maximus, gladiatorial contests in the Colosseum, and mock naval battles were thrilling, loud, and sometimes dangerous. Imagine tens of thousands of spectators cheering, trumpets blaring, dust rising from hooves and wheels, children squealing, and vendors shouting over the crowd. Even the smell of sweat, animals, and roasted meat added to the experience. Entertainment was immersive, messy, and spectacular, a perfect way to forget daily stress for a while. Music and storytelling were everywhere. Street musicians played flutes, lyres, and percussion instruments, sometimes drawing small crowds. Storytellers recited myths, history, or local gossip, adding flair, gestures, and dramatic pauses. Children listened wide-eyed, parents smiled, and occasionally a cat or dog would wander through, causing laughter. Music and stories weren't just fun. They were how Romans connected with culture, history, and each other. Leisure also included exercise and sport. Boys practiced running, wrestling, or swimming, sometimes in local pools or riverbanks. Men and women exercised in the baths or open spaces, jogging, stretching, and lifting light weights. Imagine a young boy trying to impress friends by jumping over a small fountain, slipping, and landing in a puddle. Chaos, laughter, and lessons in balance all at once. Even quiet activities mattered. Reading scrolls, writing letters, or practicing calligraphy were forms of relaxation and self-expression. Some Romans enjoyed gardens or small courtyards, sitting quietly among plants, birds, and fountains. A gentle breeze, the soft sound of water, and a cat prowling nearby. Leisure didn't have to be loud to be memorable. In essence, Roman leisure was varied, social, and immersive. It wasn't just a break from survival, it was part of survival. Games, baths, theater, music, banquets, and festivals help people learn social rules, build networks, observe the city, and release stress. Humor, accidents, playful chaos, and small acts of mischief were always part of the mix. So when you picture a Roman day off, see this. Kids running through the forum, dogs dodging carts, musicians playing on street corners, citizens gossiping in baths, families enjoying banquets, and crowds cheering at races. Life was busy, messy, and structured, but always with room for fun, laughter, and a little chaos. That balance of work and play helped Romans survive, thrive, and maybe even enjoy themselves along the way. In ancient Rome, politics wasn't a boring meeting. It was a full-on theater with speeches, strategy, gossip, and sometimes literal mudslinging. Power shaped everything. The city, the forum, family life, and even your chances of survival. The Roman Republic had a mix of officials, consuls, senators, magistrates, and tribunes. Imagine a busy morning in the forum. Senators in crisp togas, arguing passionately, their voices carrying across marble columns. Citizens gathered to listen, some nodding along, some whispering jokes, others heckling with perfectly timed one-liners. Politics was a spectator sport. Wealthy patricians dominated public life. Their opinions carried weight, and their alliances determined who got power and who stayed in the shadows. Picture a young senator, nervously adjusting his toga, whispering strategy to a friend, while a dog wove between their legs and a child shouted a question about the price of bread. It was serious, but humans and pets made it lively. The popular assemblies were where citizens voted, debated, and voiced opinions. Every vote mattered, and speeches could make or break careers. Orators practiced gestures, pauses, and dramatic flair. Imagine a boy observing from the edge, wide-eyed, learning the art of persuasion before he could even reach the podium. Mistakes? The crowd would notice, and sometimes laugh. Power wasn't always polite. Political rivalries could turn ugly. Insults, legal battles, or clever plots. Romans thrived on strategy, alliances, and negotiation. Picture a senator slipping a note to an ally, a rival glancing suspiciously, and nearby children accidentally dropping a basket of fruit. Small chaos in the middle of serious schemes. The Senate was the heart of governance. Marble halls echoed with discussion, debate, and occasional laughter at a witty remark. Senators argued over laws, taxes, wars, and public projects. Even inside these grand halls, human nature shone. A distracted senator scratching a nose, a dog wandering through the atrium, a young scribe whispering corrections. Politics was high stakes, but life carried on in its little, funny ways. Elections were dramatic. Campaigning involved speeches, gifts, promises, and parades. Citizens watched, discussed, and occasionally heckled. Imagine banners waving, musicians playing, vendors shouting, and children darting through crowds, all while serious political decisions hung in the balance. Power and spectacle were inseparable. The balance of power was fragile. Ambitious men could rise quickly, or fall just as fast. Julius Caesar, for example, climbed with cunning, charisma, and a little luck, and maybe a dog sniffing at the wrong time. Lessons in strategy, patience, and observation were everywhere. Watch gestures, read faces, notice alliances. Survival in politics was about more than knowledge. It was about awareness. Even ordinary citizens felt politics in daily life. Taxes, public games, roads, grain distributions. Decisions made in the Senate or by consuls affected whether dinner was plentiful, bread was affordable, or the forum was lively. Watching debates, overhearing gossip, or observing gestures taught lessons in power dynamics. In short, Roman politics was alive, dramatic, and educational. It blended strategy, personality, hierarchy, humor, and unpredictability. Power wasn't just a concept. It was a living, moving part of the city, shaped by speeches, alliances, and sometimes small chaotic moments. A dropped scroll, a dog chasing a coin, or a child shouting, "Look," right as a senator made a key point. So, if you imagine walking through Rome and observing politics, see this: senators debating passionately, citizens whispering opinions, children watching, dogs weaving through legs, vendors shouting, banners waving. It was messy, colorful, competitive, and endlessly fascinating. Understanding power, learning its rules, and laughing at the little chaos. It was all part of surviving and thriving in Rome. Walking through a Roman city was like stepping into a living, breathing blueprint. Every street, building, and fountain carefully planned, but full of life, noise, and little chaos. The streets were mostly narrow and winding, lined with shops, stalls, and homes. Imagine cobblestones underfoot, uneven but sturdy, echoing the clip-clop of cart wheels and the shuffle of sandals. Children darted between adults, sometimes chasing dogs or kicking a ball, while merchants shouted to advertise bread, olives, or fresh fish. The city wasn't just a place to live, it was a sensory adventure. At the heart of it all was the Forum, the bustling civic center. Marble columns rose above busy markets, temples, and public offices. Citizens gathered here to discuss politics, make deals, or simply watch the world go by. Picture a young girl pausing to admire a statue, a vendor juggling oranges while calling prices, and a dog weaving carefully between the crowd. Architecture and life were intertwined, each highlighting the other. Romans loved their temples. Grand, towering structures dedicated to gods like Jupiter, Venus, and Mars dotted the city. Elaborate columns, carved friezes, and intricate doors invited citizens to look up in awe. Imagine walking beneath a soaring portico, the shadow cooling your face, the scent of incense drifting from inside, and a cat slinking along the steps as if judging your devotion. Temples weren't just sacred. They were a visual reminder of Roman skill, ambition, and devotion. Water was everywhere. Aqueducts carried streams from distant hills, supplying public fountains, baths, and private homes. Imagine walking past a fountain in the city square, the gentle gurgle of water mixing with the calls of merchants, laughter of children, and the occasional braying donkey. Engineering wasn't hidden behind walls. It was part of daily life, flowing and sparkling in the sun. Baths were another architectural marvel. Large, open structures with warm pools, exercise areas, and intricate mosaics served as both social and practical centers. Imagine walking across heated floors, smelling soap and oils, hearing the splash of bathers, and spotting a dog snoozing near the entrance. Every detail, from marble columns to tiled walls, spoke of Roman craftsmanship. Bridges and roads connected the city, carrying trade, messages, and travelers. Cobblestones rattled under carts, horses trotted, and citizens walked along sidewalks slightly elevated to avoid puddles. Street sounds blended into a living orchestra, the clatter of hooves, merchants calling prices, children shouting, and the distant hum of temple chants. Each street was a stage for everyday life. Markets were always busy. Stalls overflowed with produce, textiles, pottery, and trinkets. Merchants shouted, haggled, and gestured wildly. Children wove between tables, sometimes bumping into carts, while dogs scavenged crumbs. Architecture shaped this chaos. Open-air squares allowed gatherings. Porticos offered shade, and narrow streets funneled energy into vibrant, crowded spaces. Romans paid attention to aesthetics. Public squares, fountains, arches, and statues created order within chaos. Each arch celebrated victories. Each fountain offered refreshment. Each column told a story. Imagine the Arcus Triumphalis towering over a busy street. Citizens pausing to admire reliefs of battles. A child pointing excitedly, and a stray cat climbing the base. Function and beauty were inseparable. In essence, streets and architecture weren't just practical. They were alive. Walking through a Roman city meant navigating noise, smells, crowds, and beauty all at once. Cobblestones, columns, fountains, and temples weren't just structures. They were part of the rhythm of life. The city moved, breathed, and taught lessons in design, culture, and human nature. So picture yourself strolling down a Roman street. Merchants shouting prices, children chasing a ball, dogs dodging carts, water trickling from fountains, and statues towering above. Every step was part of an architectural symphony, a mix of order, chaos, and life. Surviving Rome meant noticing these details, respecting the flow, and enjoying the unexpected moments of wonder hidden in the streets. In ancient Rome, staying clean and healthy wasn't just about vanity. It was essential for survival, though sometimes their methods might make you raise an eyebrow. Hygiene started at the public baths, which were more than just places to get clean. Imagine walking into a vast hall of steaming water, marble floors cool underfoot, the hum of conversation mixing with splashing, laughter, and the occasional squawk from a bird that wandered in. Romans bathed daily, or at least often, scrubbing with strigils, curved metal tools used to scrape off dirt and oil. Picture a young boy mimicking his father, laughing as the metal scrapes his arm, while a dog curls up nearby, probably judging the whole process. Baths had pools of varying temperatures, cold, warm, and hot. Romans moved between them like part of a ritual, chatting, exercising, and gossiping. Even the air smelled rich with oils, perfumes, and sometimes slightly less pleasant scents from crowds of bathers. Hygiene and socializing were inseparable. The baths were a place to get clean, be seen, and stay informed. Tooth care was simple but inventive. Romans used crushed bones, shells, and charcoal as toothpaste. Imagine a tiny cloud of powder while a child tries to mimic an adult, grimacing as it scrubs the teeth. Brushing wasn't as fancy as modern times, but it worked well enough to keep teeth functional mostly. Medical knowledge was a mix of observation, superstition, and early science. Physicians, or medici, studied the body, herbs, and symptoms, often treating everything from fevers to snake bites. Picture a small room filled with jars of herbs, pots simmering with strange mixtures, and a patient nervously eyeing a blunt knife for minor surgery. Sometimes treatments were surprisingly clever, sometimes not so much. A heated poultice or a poultice of herbs might soothe a wound, while a bizarre concoction could make you pause and hope for the best. Romans believed strongly in prevention. Clean water from aqueducts, public fountains, and baths helped stop disease spread, while good diet and exercise were considered crucial. Streets might be messy, but sanitation was surprisingly advanced. Public latrines, drainage systems, and sewer networks like the Cloaca Maxima moved waste efficiently, though it didn't stop smells from wafting through the city. Imagine walking past a latrine, the sound of flowing water, children peeking in curiously, and a cat darting through the shadows. Hygiene was practical, messy, and very human. Surgeries and remedies could be extreme. Broken bones were set with splints, minor wounds stitched, and abscesses drained carefully. Some remedies used herbs like willow bark, a natural aspirin, or honey as antiseptic. Picture a doctor carefully applying a paste, a patient wincing but trying not to flinch, while a curious child watches, learning early lessons in care, courage, and anatomy. Romans also relied on superstition and magic. Amulets, charms, and prayers were common for warding off disease. Parents might hang a small token above a crib, whispering protective words, while the baby gurgled happily, oblivious to divine intervention. Medicine and belief coexisted, one part practical, one part hope, one part ritual. Even small daily routines mattered. Washing hands before meals, bathing after work, and drinking clean water were survival skills. Wealthy Romans added perfumes and oils, while the poor made do with basic cleaning. But everyone understood the value of staying as clean and healthy as possible in a crowded, bustling city. In essence, Roman hygiene and medicine were creative, practical, and a little messy. Baths were social hubs. Doctors were part scientist and part herbalist. Streets were surprisingly clean for their time, and small rituals, remedies, and superstitions guided daily life. Humor, curiosity, and human error were woven into every act of care. Picture it all: steaming pools, scrubbing arms with metal tools, jars of herbs on a wooden table, flowing water in the streets, and citizens laughing, coughing, sneezing, and trying to survive all at once. Hygiene in Rome wasn't perfect, but it was essential, communal, and fascinating. In ancient Rome, the army wasn't just about fighting. It was a way of life, training citizens, shaping culture, and keeping the empire standing. And surviving in the Roman army? That was a skill all its own. The average Roman soldier, or legionary, started the day early. Imagine dawn breaking over a camp, tents fluttering, the smell of cooking porridge and damp leather, soldiers stretching stiff muscles, and a few groggy recruits tripping over sandals. Discipline was strict: stand in line, march in step, clean your armor. But there was room for humor. A stray dog often roamed the camp, sniffing boots or stealing a loaf of bread, while soldiers tried to shoo it away without losing formation. Training was intense. Soldiers practiced with wooden swords, shields, and spears, honing skills for the battlefield. Picture a group swinging practice swords in unison, dust rising, instructors shouting corrections, and one clumsy recruit spinning in the wrong direction, narrowly missing a comrade. Mistakes were punished lightly with extra drills or laughter from fellow soldiers. Precision, endurance, and teamwork were essential. Life on campaign mixed hard work and monotony. Soldiers marched for miles, carrying heavy packs, armor clanking, and tents swaying. Imagine the rhythmic tramp of hundreds of boots, the occasional grunt of a tired soldier, children and villagers waving as troops passed, and a goat sneaking into the supply line. Marching wasn't glamorous, but it built stamina, camaraderie, and stories that would be told around future campfires. Camps were organized like small cities. Rows of tents, communal kitchens, and guard posts created structure. Soldiers cooked simple meals of porridge, bread, cheese, and salted meat. Picture a cook stirring a bubbling pot over a small fire, while a legionary juggles a loaf of bread to entertain comrades, and a curious cat sniffs suspiciously at the stew. Daily life balanced work, food, and small entertainment. Romans were clever engineers, and soldiers often built fortifications, roads, and bridges on campaign. Imagine a legion digging trenches while officers measured lines, engineers inspected wooden bridges, and a soldier accidentally dumps a bucket of water on his friend. Discipline with a side of chaos. Construction wasn't just practical, it reinforced order, efficiency, and survival skills. Weapons and armor were serious business. Soldiers wore helmets, Larica segmentata, metal armor, and carried shields and swords. Training included formation drills, mock battles, and learning to trust your comrades. Picture shields locking in perfect rows, spears thrusting in unison, dust swirling in the sun, and someone tripping over a stray helmet, but quickly regaining balance. Teamwork could mean life or death. Gladiators and soldiers weren't the same, but military life sometimes included mock battles for entertainment, showing off skill and courage. Spectacle, humor, and a bit of danger were intertwined. Imagine a young recruit mimicking the motions of an experienced veteran, neighbors cheering, and someone's helmet tumbling down a hill, laughs echoing even in practice. Medical care on the march was basic but effective. Doctors and medics treated wounds, infections, and illnesses with herbs, poultices, and sometimes surgery. Picture a camp surgeon carefully bandaging a scraped knee while a soldier grimaces, a child nearby watching wide-eyed, and a dog wandering through, sniffing suspiciously at every jar of herbs. Health was as much a part of survival as fighting. Military life shaped Roman identity. Discipline, teamwork, respect for authority, and clever strategy weren't just taught, they were lived daily. Humor, mistakes, and small moments of chaos made the experience human. A soldier learned to fight, march, build, and survive, all while navigating the quirks of camp life, unpredictable weather, and fellow humans and pets along the way. So, imagine a Roman legion on the move, boots clattering, tents fluttering, children peeking from village edges, dogs running through the ranks, dust rising, swords swinging in training, and laughter mingling with grunts of exertion. Military life wasn't just about war. It was about discipline, camaraderie, engineering, survival, and little chaotic moments that made the empire run. In ancient Rome, life wasn't just about surviving your own city. It was about moving goods, people, and ideas across an empire that stretched from Britain to North Africa. Travel and trade were the lifeblood of Rome, and navigating it required skill, patience, and a good sense of humor. The Roman road network was legendary. Picture miles of straight, cobblestone roads stretching across hills, forests, and rivers, connecting cities, towns, and military outposts. Travelers heard the rhythmic clip-clop of hooves, the creak of carts, and the occasional shout from a merchant or a lost traveler. Roads weren't always clean, and dust, mud, and stray animals added character. A child might run along the edge, waving to a passing soldier, while a dog chased a rolling wheel. Every journey was alive. Travel wasn't always easy. Journeys could take days or weeks, and inns and way stations offered brief relief. Imagine arriving at a roadside mancio, the smell of cooking stew, the warmth of a fire, and a room filled with weary travelers swapping stories. Someone might accidentally kick a pot, a cat curls up on a bench, and laughter spreads. Comfort was relative, but stories, company, and rest made the miles more bearable. Trade brought goods from across the empire: olive oil from Hispania, wine from Gaul, grain from Egypt, spices from the east. Markets in Rome overflowed with colors, smells, and sounds. Picture a busy marketplace. Merchants shouting prices, baskets of figs and dates piled high, fabrics fluttering in the breeze, and a child trying to sneak a grape while a dog sniffs at spilled crumbs. Trade wasn't just business, it was spectacle. Shipping was essential. Roman ports bustled with activity. Sailors unloading amphorae, merchants haggling over cargo, and the scent of salt water mingling with fish and timber. Imagine crates of olive oil being rolled carefully down ramps, a seagull swooping for scraps, and a young boy tugging on his father's hand, eyes wide at the chaos. The Mediterranean connected people, ideas, and goods in ways roads alone couldn't. Travel required planning, patience, and observation. Maps existed, but travelers often relied on milestones, guides, or simply asking locals for directions. Imagine a merchant scratching his head at an unfamiliar crossroads, consulting a clay tablet map, while a donkey impatiently waits and a child giggles at the confusion. Every journey had surprises, delays, and stories waiting to happen. Trade also meant cultural exchange. Foods, styles, languages, and religious practices moved alongside goods. A Roman visiting Alexandria might taste new spices, hear Greek songs, and see exotic clothing, while merchants in Britain might marvel at Roman tools, coins, and scrolls. Every transaction wasn't just material. It was a chance to experience the wider world. Safety was always a concern. Bandits, rough terrain, and unpredictable weather made travel risky. Soldiers, merchants, or travelers learned to watch, anticipate, and adapt. Imagine a caravan cautiously crossing a narrow mountain pass, soldiers scouting ahead, a child clinging to a parent, and a goat wandering into the path. Chaos and danger mixed with routine. Even everyday travel had quirks. Carts overloaded with goods creaked, horses snorted, dogs chased each other along the road, and children ran alongside, laughing or yelling. Life moved constantly, in rhythm with commerce, social interaction, and movement. Romans thrived on the constant flow of people and goods, learning, trading, surviving, and enjoying little moments of chaos along the way. In essence, travel and trade were adventure, necessity, and connection all at once. Roads, ships, marketplaces, and inns weren't just infrastructure. They were stages for human life, ingenuity, humor, and small accidents. The Roman Empire thrived because people moved, traded, and adapted, turning every journey into a story of survival and discovery. So, picture it all. A busy port, carts clattering on stone roads, merchants shouting, dogs chasing coins, children running, crates being loaded, smells mixing, and distant hills rolling under a warm sun. Travel and trade in Rome weren't just practical. They were alive, messy, and endlessly fascinating. Life in ancient Rome wasn't all baths, banquets, and bustling streets. Danger lurked around every corner, and death was a part of daily life. But Romans faced it with practicality, ritual, and sometimes a touch of dark humor. Cities were busy, noisy, and occasionally hazardous. Imagine cobblestone streets crowded with carts, wagons, and animals. A distracted merchant could bump into a child, or a cart might lurch unexpectedly, sending goods, and sometimes people, tumbling. Slips, bruises, and scrapes were common, but survival often meant quick reflexes and awareness. Even a small dog dodging the chaos added unpredictability. Disease was a major threat. Without modern medicine or germ theory, Romans relied on hygiene, herbal remedies, and superstition. Epidemics sometimes swept through densely populated areas. Picture neighbors whispering, children peering from windows, vendors cautiously opening their stalls, and families lighting lamps in prayer while hoping the gods would spare them. Death was omnipresent, but people adapted, cared for the sick, and continued daily life with resilience. Roman homes had their dangers too. Kitchens with open fires, sharp knives, and boiling pots could easily cause accidents. Slaves, children, and pets moved through tight spaces, creating comic or tragic moments. A spilled pot of hot soup could ruin a day, teach caution, or leave everyone laughing nervously. Safety wasn't perfect, but life went on. War, of course, was another looming danger. Soldiers faced battles, ambushes, and injuries that could be fatal. Imagine a legionary standing guard, the dust of training swirling around him, a comrade tripping over a helmet, and distant horns signaling movement. Danger was constant, but discipline, strategy, and teamwork gave soldiers a fighting chance. Natural hazards added to the unpredictability. Floods from the Tiber, fires from crowded wooden streets, and sudden storms could devastate parts of the city. Picture citizens scrambling to move goods, children gripping their parents' hands, and dogs barking at the chaos, all while smoke and water mix into a citywide drama. Romans learned to expect the unexpected, building resilience into daily routines. Funerals were both a ritual and a reminder of mortality. Death was marked with processions, offerings, and remembrance. Imagine a family carrying a loved one's ashes in an urn, neighbors following respectfully, children peeking curiously, and small animals weaving through the crowd. Tombs lined streets outside the city, serving as constant reminders that life was fleeting, but memory, honor, and ritual endured. Romans also practiced superstitions and charms to ward off death or misfortune. Amulets, prayers, and small rituals were sprinkled throughout daily life. Imagine a child clutching a tiny token before bed, parents whispering protective words, while outside, the city hums with commerce, chatter, and tiny accidents. Life and death were intertwined, practical yet tinged with hope. Even the way Romans approached danger had humor and humanity. Stories of clumsy chariot drivers, mischievous pets causing minor accidents, and nervous children witnessing minor mishaps circulated widely. Humor softened the fear, teaching people to survive with awareness, laughter, and adaptability. In essence, dangers and death were part of the Roman rhythm of life. Streets, homes, battlefields, and natural disasters posed threats, but humans, animals, humor, and ritual made survival possible. Life was fragile, chaotic, and unpredictable, but full of learning, community, and small, meaningful joys along the way. Picture it all: a crowded street, carts clattering, children squealing, dogs weaving, smoke rising from a distant fire, a neighbor whispering a prayer, and life moving forward despite the dangers. Death was inevitable, but Romans faced it with resilience, ritual, and a little humor to keep spirits alive.